So here we are. We did not want to go to Nineveh. In fact, we booked it out of town going the other way. Only there was that storm, and then there was that big fish, the whale thing. That was honestly unpleasant. But when we got chucked up on shore, well, there we were in Nineveh. And the only thing to do was to get it over with. No one ever listens to the prophets. So we went a third of a way through the city, saying 40 days more and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And wouldn't you know, they listened and repented. Everybody, king, cattle, everybody. So we bailed. We went out into the desert, found a good vantage point, built a little shelter for ourselves, nothing too elaborate, and sat back to watch the show. We wanted to be out of the way when God started destroying Nineveh. Only God wouldn't stop talking at us. And nothing is getting destroyed except us in this wretched sun. And we just want to die. Right? Right? That's the point of the book of Jonah. To give us a cranky toddler of a man to laugh at because he's so incredibly over the top in his grumpiness. We all remember the whale part of the story, but that's just like 3 lines. If this were a normal prophet who goes to tell the people to repent, then the whole story would end when the city repented. Except that normally the prophets tell people to repent and no one does. This crazy little story with this hilarious main character who is so peevish, who yells at God when he's angry, I knew that you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and ready to relent from punishing. No, seriously, no one should have to put up with mercy and abounding love from their God. You know, we laugh at him because he is so over the top. We laugh at him and something cracks open and we catch a glimpse of ourselves. Perhaps that's why the Jews read the book of Jonah on the Day of Atonement, when everyone is called to make right their transgressions. Because cranky little Jonah is the best guide of how we fail to remain right with each other and with God. When God calls Jonah to go to Nineveh, Jonah boards a ship and heads for Tarshish in Spain, the exact opposite end of the Mediterranean. Jonah disobeyed God's command, and yet Jonah doesn't seem to notice there's no lightning bolt. There's no wrath from God at all. God pursues Jonah, but with love. God doesn't even let Jonah drown in the storm. And it never seems to cross Jonah's mind that the sailors, the pagans on the ship, make every attempt to save him from harm at all costs. They act more like God than he does. Even the fish was more obedient than Jonah. When Jonah tells the fish to vomit up Jonah on the land, it did as it was told. Jonah says he knows that God is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, but he doesn't seem to notice when all that forbearance and love is directed right at him. Just like us, when we don't notice. The Assyrians, whose capital was in Nineveh, were brutal enemies. They killed and destroyed their way to a huge empire that they then taxed to support their armies for still more empire building. The fall of the northern kingdom of Israel had been traumatic for the whole country. The Assyrians who lived in Nineveh were Jonah's enemies. No one in Jonah's community was going to argue that they should be allowed to repent and be forgiven. They had done the unforgivable. So Jonah resists going to Nineveh, and when he's basically dropped on their shore, he does the absolute minimum and then goes up to get a good seat to watch God smiting the city. And when that destruction doesn't come, Jonah asks to die. Hatred of the enemy has become so fundamental to Jonah that when their destruction is not going to happen, the desire for vengeance means life itself is robbed of all meaning. Just like us, when our enemies don't appear to suffer. God does not give up on Jonah. Jonah's got his little hut set up to watch the destruction of Nineveh. And God makes a bush spring up to give him more shade. And then a worm causes the bush to wither. Jonah is ripped about the loss of that bush, way more upset about that than the destruction of the city. And God points out how much more upset he is about the loss of a plant than the loss of the city and all the lives within it. Just like us, when our comfort is disturbed. Jonah says that he has always known that God was gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing. And we would say the same thing. But what he misses, what we miss, is that means God is in relationship with us, with our enemies, with the natural world. When did Jonah need the shade of the bush the most? When did the people of Nineveh need God the most? Why can't Jonah draw the parallels between the two? Because Jonah is unwilling to extend the benefit of relationship, it means that Jonah will lose the benefits that come through relationship when he needs them the most. The people of Nineveh see their own wickedness and they repent. Jonah never sees his own wicked heart. And that allows him, that wicked heart that allows him to find compassion for a plant, but not for people. God is focused on that blindness and is still trying to get Jonah into relationship with his enemies. Everyone knows that everything called for the elimination of Nineveh. The law called for it, prudence called for it, morality called for it, politics and economics called for it, survival of the fittest called for it. But there was one who saw something different. Something more and something far more precious. The God of relationship saw another possibility. And to be sure that we saw it and saw all the possibilities which surround us, the chance to walk away from nationalism and racism and sexism and homophobia and nativism and all the other ways we choose to protect our own comfort by damaging and diminishing the relationships we have with each other and with God. God gave us a story about this cranky little prophet. So here we are. Are we ready to repent? Or does God need to go get the whale and the bush and the worm to make sure that we learn the lesson about being in relationship with each other and with God? Amen.